Yeah, that's really what we wanted to focus on with the article. Was there had been the introduction of the EU's Indo Pacific Strategy immediately or within a month or so after the publication of our original report. And so what we wanted to explore was where the EU was going to take the Indo Pacific Strategy once it had been approved and formalized in the fall of last year, so just a little over a year ago. So the AUKUS deal is the first one. So immediately upon, almost within days of the EU introducing its new Indo-Pacific strategy, the United States and partners introduced the AUKUS arrangement, which basically undercut an agreement that France and Australia had for submarine sales. And so this immediately called into question how much cooperation there was going to be between countries that were seen as possible partners for the EU's new Indo-Pacific strategy. So countries like Australia, the United States, and then of course with France being the key country, especially the key country that has a willingness and an ability to use military power in the Indo-Pacific. So the AUKUS deal was highly disruptive, and again, one of the reasons that we began the report with a focus on that was because we thought that would tell us something about where the Indo-Pacific strategy might go, given that disruption. Even if the EU had wanted to focus on its Indo-Pacific strategy, and if France, with the presidency of the European Council, had wanted to focus on the Indo-Pacific strategy, which it did initially, the Ukraine issue, Russia's invasion, in a sense became all-consuming. It brought into question the extent to which the EU could or should focus on the Indo-Pacific as opposed to the immediate threats and concerns related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But it also brought up the question of whether or not the United States and the EU would, as a result of the Ukraine invasion, be more likely to cooperate in the Indo-Pacific, which is something that officials on both sides at least said was a likelihood. Well, I think this is something that there was a lot of official support, and there was a set of meetings with high-level US and EU officials right after the Biden administration introduced its own Indo-Pacific strategy in February. So there were some discussions about how the US and the EU might cooperate in the Indo-Pacific, and there were discussions and support from officials on both sides saying that there was goodwill and a likelihood that they would cooperate on issues in the Indo-Pacific. That includes things like infrastructure, but also security concerns. So there's some idea that somehow the Ukraine war would propel greater cooperation between the EU and the US in the Indo-Pacific. I'm a bit skeptical of that in the paper, in part because of fundamental interests that are divergent between the US and the EU in the Indo-Pacific, mainly the sort of degree of challenge that the Indo-Pacific strategies claim relevant to China. So basically, is China the problem motivating Indo-Pacific strategies? And I think for the EU, the answer is no, or at least not publicly declared as such. And I think the EU really wants to have the Indo-Pacific strategy be more than just something that is about China. Whereas for the United States, I think it's fairly clear that the Indo-Pacific strategy and getting allies together is about and focused on China. Yeah, this is, to me, the fundamental question for the EU and the US and for any other country that's got an Indo-Pacific strategy is to what extent do countries in the region, in the Indo-Pacific, actually think that this is a good strategy, that this is a good approach? Are governments and businesses in the region willing to go along with and cooperate with countries in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere in Asia? And I think this is a big question mark. This would be the next stage, I think, of research, would really be to better understand what countries, for example, in ASEAN, think of Indo-Pacific strategies, especially given that they've made it fairly clear that they do not want to have to choose sides, for example, between the West and China.